Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Talk Recovery Radio. We're coming to you live, noon till 1 every Thursday. Here I am with co-host Darren Gaylor. Hey, Darren, good to see you.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, sir. Welcome to Talk Recovery, everybody. This is our seventh season. Hundreds of guests, thousands of listeners, 7 years. Talk Recovery Radio brought to you by New West Recovery, which is made up of Last Row Recovery Center and Westminster House, Canada's recovery capital. Always love saying that. Darren, how's it going?
It's well. I'm a little under the weather, but other than that, doing good.
Doing good. Oh, I hope it's just a little cold.
Just a cold. Oh, you see, I just realized you just have to be in contact and know some people that have gone and been tested and wait for the results, and then you're pretty sure that you're okay too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I still don't really know anyone close to me that's gotten COVID or anything, so I'm grateful for that, and sad for all those that are getting sick and all that. Talk Recovery Radio, you can follow us on Facebook. If you're watching us live right now, you're on our Facebook page, but we rebroadcast the show on Vancouver Co-op Radio 100.5 FM. And so if you're listening to us on the radio right now, we're 1 week behind because that's just the way it is. It takes a week to get on the air. And they're having a fundraiser right now, Darren.
Yeah, thanks for all the fundraising. It looks like they're doing pretty well. I hope some of that fundraising money has come from our viewership and listeners as well.
Yeah, some people have donated for Talk Recovery. So Co-op Radio is nonprofit. There's no commercials and sponsors, so it's all community radio. So you can become a member of Co-op Radio. You can donate. It's their fall fundraiser. I think they're at $19,000 so far with their fall fundraiser. So that's pretty sweet. So thanks to everyone that's been donating. Go to coopradio.org to make a donation. And, we're just got a new election. Right? The NDP have taken over British Columbia. And, I don't really have any political opinions per se. But a message out there to whoever is going to be the new Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Yeah.
The only thing we want is to please be sure to have some type of recovery plan or recovery-oriented system plan to go along with all the new innovative approaches to deal with addiction in BC, which comes from Safe Supply and Housing First and everything else. So that's one of our only questions. There really isn't a national recovery plan like there is for COVID. And I don't know why no one sees that. It's there's a national recovery plan for the economy, for COVID. We sent a question to Dr. Bonnie Henry. We haven't gotten a response yet, but it was basically along the lines like, what are the recovery rates of addiction in British Columbia? Like, we know how many people are overdosing, but like, how many people are recovering and how are they recovering? And it was kind of on the commentary of, can you imagine if she just went on the news every day and said how many people died from COVID and then walked off the stage? You know what I mean? Like, we have a recovery plan, recovery results, we have all this stuff going on, but for addiction, it's like, yeah, that's how many people are overdosing, and really that's all the news we get. So it's too bad.
It's sad.
It's sad. Yeah. We need to do more. Like, it's just not enough.
Well, let's get into
our guest.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what we do here every Thursday. We talk to experts. Some of them say they're not experts, they're just humble people, but they're experts in some form of recovery, many pathways, many conversations. And Darren, who are we talking recovery with today?
Yes, today we get to talk recovery with Dr. Linville Meadows. He's joining us today from Virginia, it looks like, and welcome to the show, Dr. Meadows.
Hi guys, how you doing?
Not too bad. I'll just let our listeners and viewers know you are an honors graduate of the UNC School of Medicine, studied at Duke University, became an oncologist, so now a since retired oncologist, which is research, diagnosis, treatment of cancer. So, we're talking to expert here in some field, and also a story of addiction and an author now. Your book came out September 1st. A Spiritual
Yes.
Pathway to Recovery from Addiction, a Physician's Journey of Discovery. Okay, so where am I going to start here? On one of your blogs, you mentioned there for physicians, there's a 70% rate of long-term survival, and they continue to practice medicine 5 years later,
Right.
after having gone through an intensive treatment program. Were you one of those doctors?
Yes, yes.
That was able to treat your disease and continue to practice?
Actually, I never went back to practice. I retired at that point. Physicians get addicted just like everybody else. The disease is very democratic. It doesn't care if you're a dock worker or a doctor or a lawyer or a TV personality. It really doesn't care. It's basically 10% of the general population across the board has some form of addiction. There's been estimated, obviously, to be close to 30+ million people in the U.S. that have this as a problem.
Right. I mean, that's good to know, because the stigma around, the streets, that level of addiction. I mean, I think that's been just part of the norm, for people attaching addiction to some sort of visual. It's not our doctor. It's not our, pilots that are flying me to vacation. It couldn't possibly be. These are people that have gone through school. They're educated. They've got their stuff together, so to speak. So the fact that you say it just ranges right across the board, in human beings. Is this because it's not the drugs that, or the substance or the thing that causes addiction? Rather, it is within the human brain. It's already there, and that component, the brain disease component, is that something you're familiar with?
Yeah, well, yeah. Addiction definitely runs in families. When I went into rehab, the general consensus was nobody in our family ever had that kind of problem. And then when I got out, I started talking to cousins on both sides of the family, all over the place. It can take a lot of different forms. You could be a workaholic. I met a guy once who was a confirmed alcoholic, and he was in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he looked at me one day and he says, "Lynn, I find myself working 10, 12, 14 hours a day." He says, "I think I just swapped one addiction for the other." And I think he was right. My grandfather ran moonshine across the ridges in Harlan County, until he found God and became a preacher. You hated to see him coming because he would preach at you till you were red in the face. And he has swapped his alcoholism for hyper-religiosity. Okay. It can skip generations. I talked to a lady one time who said, "I don't understand this inherited thing." She says, all my brothers and sisters were all crackheads, and my parents, they're all alcoholics."
Right.
So it doesn't matter what form it takes. All right. There was a famous actress out in Hollywood who was brought before the judge for chronic shoplifting. All right. And he said, "Well, you got to pay this money back, but you're going to drug rehab too." All right. So that addiction can take many, many forms. You can think about it like diabetes. All right. I may, in my family, I may have diabetes that runs in the family. I may get it or not. All right. Then there's an invisible line that I cross when I go from sort of having the tendency to diabetes to actually crossing it. Once I cross that line, I can never go back and eat sugar again without my blood sugar just going sky high. Well, addiction is like that. Just because you drink a lot or use a lot doesn't make you an addict. There is, in fact, an invisible line that I step across in some way or the other. Nobody knows exactly how you go from pre-diabetic to diabetic, or how you go from heavy user to actually being addicted. But once across that line, you can't go back. The old timers talk about how you can take grazing can never go back to being a grape. All right. And no matter how, it's also, it's both the diseases are chronic and relapsing. They will never go away. It's interesting that the relapse rate in addiction is just about the same as in asthma or diabetes. Okay. The problem is that addiction, you add the extra addiction, alcoholism, however you want to think about it, is a chronic, relapsing, and fatal illness. Right, left untreated, it will kill you, whatever form it takes. You know, maybe as a gambling addict, you get entangled with the loan sharks and they kill you, or if you're a sex addict and get entangled with somebody with some nasty disease, it's going to kill you. One way or the other, it's chronic, relapsing, and fatal.
Yeah.
So, Darren, I wanted to talk to him about being a physician, okay? And being a physician with your I've heard the success rate with physicians is much more higher when recovery because of the conditions they put for physicians on returning to work and so forth. You said you retired, but do you know, the idea that addiction is addiction, and it doesn't matter what your background or who it is, but really the way society treats addiction, I mean, it depends on what your social capital is on how you're going to be treated. It's this one of my biggest pet peeves, and we've shared this on the show a million times. If you're a doctor or you're a nurse or you're a pilot or something of that grandeur, you're probably going to go to an abstinence supported treatment center, and the goal for you is abstinence. But if you're not that, and maybe homeless or not above the poverty level, you're probably going to get harm reduction and be on medication for the rest of your life, because the medical model's really taken over the recovery model. What do you think about that? Do you think there is a difference in treating people depending on what the consequences are? Do you think it's all hogwash and it shouldn't be like that, and it's stigmatizing even more?
Well, I was taught in medical school that the standard of care was the same whether you were a homeless person or the president of the United States. Obviously, today, that's simply not true anymore. And regardless of what kind of problem, medical problem you have, the more money you have, the better treatment you get. But the idea, abstinence in and of itself isn't enough. All right, just simply stopping drinking doesn't take you to a place where you're comfortable inside your skin.
That's right.
Abstinence is the first thing that you have to have. You just like the diabetic that just can't eat cherry pie anymore. You know, the alcoholic cannot use it all, or they will go right back into the pit. They've crossed the line where they have completely lost the ability to choose whether to drink or not.
So you wrote a book about the spiritual pathway to recovery. So how did that happen? Like, did you have a spiritual awakening? Were you just like beaten down where like you had no choice? What happened?
Well, for me, I was on my 49th birthday. I woke up and realized that I was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and that I had tried to quit, and nothing I did had helped me. I was afraid, as you mentioned, I was afraid to tell anybody that I had this kind of a problem. In medical school, in the late 70s and early 80s, there was basically no course on addiction or how to treat it. You know, we knew all the complications of alcoholism, like cirrhosis and pancreatitis and that kind of stuff. There was nothing about how to treat it. I had no idea what to do. But I had reached a point where it was either quit or die. And at that point, that's what people call a bottom. You know, you can say, well, I'm a high bottom drunk and a low bottom drunk, but basically to take on the lifetime job of recovery, you have to reach a point where it's either quit or die, and that's the place. Abstinence is first, and then you work on what I call sobriety, which is where you begin to work the steps. You may have a sponsor. You begin to talk the talk, and in some ways, maybe you walk the walk, go to a lot of meetings, talk to people in the program. But there's something called the AA waltz, which is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, where you work steps 1, 2, 3, and when you get done with that, you get a new sponsor and start over again. To go beyond that, to really find what I call recovery, takes that spiritual awakening you'll talk about. For most people, it's kind of a gradual thing. You begin to learn, first of all, spiritual principles start with honesty. The first step of the 12 steps of AA. Honesty is a principle without which you're not going to get anywhere. The other principles are faith, which is really hard to come by. Right? I've been bad. I've been beaten down. Felt so terrible about myself. To find any kind of faith is very, very difficult. Hope is another spiritual principle that we can't do without. It's hard to find hope. For me, the only way I found hope was listening to the stories of the other people. Here I was with a couple of with a room full of other doctors who were at the absolute low point of their careers, and they were laughing and cutting up and having a good time and working on what they were working on. And I said, I don't know what those guys got, but I want it. All right. Go ahead.
I'm curious, as a doctor that studied and treated cancer, a disease. I'm assuming you didn't treat it with telling your patient to go find a sponsor and share how you feel about this in a holistic approach, find spirituality. Like, I'm sure there was medication after medication after medication. How did you, as a doctor, after admitting your alcoholism or addiction, did you not try to find the pill? How did you get influenced into a spiritual path?
That's actually simple. When you look at the disease of addiction, it affects the mind, the body, and the spirit. So any kind of treatment that you're going to apply to the disease has to touch all three. I have to be abstinent. My brain has been so completely disordered by the poisons I put into it. I'm usually depressed. Almost everybody is depressed by the time they get to day one of rehab. And then there's the insanity of the alcoholism itself. So the mind has to be treated intensively. The body is obviously completely racked, all right, in many, many ways. And that will take time to heal. And the spirit has been whatever that is, where my conscience comes from, my ideas of how to treat other people, how to live in the world. They call it moral bankruptcy when you reach this point where you would throw all of your principles away, all of your medical principles, all the altruistic principles that you started with. If it gets in the way of my using, forget it. All right. So you have to address all three of those. And to address the spirit requires some kind of, I don't know what spirit is. I don't know what spirituality is. I just know that there's something there that is greater than me, and that I can tap into that'll help me get better, to help me become more honest, to help me learn to think more of other people than myself, to pull out the compassion that used to be there and apply it in the people around me. So you have to deal with all three. I wish there was, people are always saying that the oncologists don't want their patients to get well because they would go away. I'm sorry. If you sat in the room with a family whose loved one is dying and been a part of that, and you and your nurses have busted your guts trying to get this person one more Christmas, it's a different process. I wish that prayer would cure pancreatic cancer, but it never did. Prayer turns out to be probably, if I could go back and talk to myself when I was a young man before all this started, what would I tell him? Well, I think the one thing that I would say, and it's really kind of simple, it's that prayer works. All right. I never would have believed that when I was a kid. My grandpa, I told you about, I basically reached a point where I didn't believe any of the stuff he was peddling, and I threw it all away. Um, with the role of God being absent, I applied for the job, and as you know, I got the job. Um, um, uh, so you have to treat that spiritual part. When I was the first couple of weeks of rehab, I got really mad. When you take away somebody's chemical coping skills, I got a problem, I got the pills for the answer. When you take away a person's chemical coping skills, unfortunately, he hasn't developed the non-chemical skills. And what happens over the first 2 or 3 weeks of their recovery is they get really angry. All right. And I got so angry, my roommates took away my car keys and said, "You're not going anywhere," which is really kind of interesting because I had been thinking I should go drive my car onto the railroad tracks and wait for the 310 to show up. So they were right. And this guy comes in who I'd never seen before, never saw after, and sat down on the couch in our apartment. And he says, "You've got a resentment." I said, "No, I don't." And he says, "Yes, you do." So shut up and listen. And he says, "I'm going to give you a prayer that I want you to do once a day for 2 weeks." And I said, wait. I don't think I believe in God, and I sure don't know how to pray. He says, "Shut up and do what I tell you." Here's the prayer. God, I thank you for taking away this resentment and replacing it with the faith that no matter what happens, everything will be all right. And he said, do it every day for 2 weeks. And being a good alcoholic, once a day was good, then twice a day would be better. So I did it twice a day. And in about 5 or 6, 7 days, all of a sudden, this resentment, which had filled up the whole worry box of my mind, had gone down to where it's just a little, where am I here? There you are. Just a little knuckle of resentment. And I thought, as a scientist, I did bench research and clinical research. And as a scientist, you do an experiment, find something that works, you want to do it again. So I did, and it worked again. And I've done that prayer for over 20 years, and it's never failed. That's where my faith began. That is, I know when I send my, whatever prayer is, we could argue about that, but whenever I send my intentions out on the universe, whenever I pray to whatever my higher power might be, whenever I make that my intention clear, what happens is that it comes back to me. Whatever it is, it works. And there's another story. I was about a year sober. I was walking down the street in Jacksonville. All right, it was a beautiful spring day. I'd just come out of a noon meeting. About a year sober, I was feeling great. And there was a deli about 2 blocks down the street. And I decided, well, I'll walk down the street and get some sandwiches, take them home to my mom and my son. And as I walked down the street, this voice came over my shoulder and it went, "You could have a glass of wine while you wait." And I went, whoa, and I thought, boy, this is not good. And I really, I'm not quite sure what I want to do with this, but it is kind of frightening. And the voice said, "They won't be able to smell it on your breath." And I went, "You got to be kidding me. Everybody knows you can smell wine." But if the voice says it, it must be true. Now I'm really frightened. Now I am really scared. I thought, well, this was actually in the days before cell phones, so I couldn't, this dates me, So I couldn't pick up the cell phone and call my sponsor. I'd just come out of a meeting, so that wasn't going to help. I didn't have my big book with me, so I couldn't open that. And I thought, well, maybe you could pray. And I went, oh, and so I couldn't even think of a prayer. The only thing I could think of was the Serenity Prayer. And I prayed it all the way through down to the end. And I was still scared. So I started over again. And I got halfway through the second time. And I couldn't remember why I was praying. And I walked on down the street, got my sandwiches, checked out at the deli. And as I was checking out, I suddenly remembered what had happened to me on the street. And I laughed at myself. So I don't know what it is, you could argue it.
On that comment, I have a question.
Yeah.
As a researcher and as a physician, what is that voice that's like, "Hey, have a glass of wine"? Like medically, will we, can you define what that is? Is there a way to suppress it medically? I get how you did the Serenity Prayer, but for the layman folk and for people that aren't, into the 12-step model, what do you do with that voice? What is it, and what do you do with it?
Well, I don't know. I can't take, look, science is the art of measuring things, okay? I can tell you how tall somebody is, how much they weigh. I can tell you the speed of light. I can tell you how much rocket propellant I need to send a man to the moon. I can measure that. The things of the spirit really cannot be measured. Not only that, they can't be defined. Measure love, measure courage, measure compassion. All right. Can't do it. And in fact, if I put 10 scientists in a room and asked them to define the speed of light, they would rattle it off to 10 decimal points each in just a matter of minutes. But if I ask them to define love, they'd be there all night and they never would agree on it. You can't define matters of the spirit. You can't measure it. So you have things that are the purvey of science, and you have things that are not the purvey of science. So just because it's out there doesn't mean, what was it? Hamlet said, he said, Horatio, there are more things under heaven and earth that are dreamt of in your philosophy. That was Shakespeare 400 years ago. So some things never change.
I mean,
in the Tao Te Ching, there's the opening line is that which is called the Tao is not the Tao, because it's beyond definitions, it's beyond words. And when I call it the Tao, I've immediately lost the whole essence of it.
Yeah, see,
by naming.
I'm by no means an expert or went into any field of research. I didn't get hooked on heroin because I needed to find out more about it. But I'm interested when I hear the disease model, the brain disease model, and the spiritual approach, and I'm always like there always is a connection. There's always some version of explanation of the importance of sitting in a room full of self-minded people, like-minded people, sorry, and having a confidant in sharing oneself honestly, like there's always a connection. There's always an understanding of what's happening to our brain and how we're changing ourselves from the old learned mantras from wherever they began of not being worthwhile, not being as good as that guy, and becoming responsible in a program where we, hey, if that's a prayer that I consciously do to defeat that sort of learned behavior over time that comes involuntarily, and like you say, you do it over 20 years, that becomes the new thing that we believe in, ultimately changing our brain structure, really, like changing our in a cellular way.
Yes. You can, a person in recovery can actually change. I say people don't change, but that's not true. When you go through all this personality readjustment, adjustment, finding what a higher power is, getting rid of all the junk that's in your system, you change as a person.
That's right.
I listened to a guy one time and he says, I have the disease of addiction. He was a doctor. And actually he said alcoholism, but I'm using the word addiction. He said, I have a disease of addiction, and I treat my disease with a daily dose of spirituality. And I get that spirituality from prayer and meditation and from going to meetings. All right. The disease affects all parts of my body. If I don't treat the brain if I'm duly diagnosed with, like I am, with bipolar disease, if I don't treat that bipolar disease, I'm not going to do well. If I don't treat the recovery and treat the bipolar disease, I'm still not going to do well. In the meeting, I get a dose of spirituality that I don't know what it is. I can't measure it, but when I leave the rooms, if it's been a fairly good meeting, then I feel like I'm walking 6 inches off the ground. The people that are there, the thing about that room that I'm in with those other folks is that it's the one place in the world where I don't have to wear a mask. Everybody knows where I'm coming from. Everybody's been in the same chair. Everybody's come in through the same doorway, the same quit or die, the same, oh my God, how did I get here? All right. And it's one of the few places in the world that I can be myself. When a newcomer comes in the room and I'm standing there, I say, welcome home. You made it.
Yeah. Did that happen immediately for you? Because my experience, it was probably one of the most uncomfortable and difficult doorways to walk through, because I'm yet to understand the philosophies. I'm yet to buy in. I'm yet to believe that I'm like these people. And therefore, it's just another experience of feeling all alone and feeling like I don't belong. And I can only imagine that that is the very first experience for most people walking into the room. And what would you say is the best approach for somebody? Because I've sat in a doctor's office, and he didn't write it down on his prescription pad, but he said, go to a meeting, go to an AA meeting, go to a 12-step meeting. And that was it. There was no, like, what's going to happen when I get there? Who do I talk to? Where do I sit? Like, just that whole idea of that being something so new and so frightening, could have been some of the worst advice really given. What do you think the best approach or best advice to somebody, that's maybe about to go to their first meeting?
It's all right to be afraid. You don't know what it's going to be like. That's why it's always the best if somebody that who's
Right.
in the program takes your hand and walks with you into the meeting. To just go send somebody to a meeting, might as well, the surgeon will be in the operating room, show up at 8 o'clock for surgery. That's not going to work. The other thing that's really sad is most physicians have no idea what addiction is about. Okay, 90% of them have never experienced it. If you never really experienced the intense craving, the insanity of you just can't stop till you get more, there's no way I can explain that to somebody. It's like trying to explain a sunset to a guy that's been blind from birth. You just can't do it. I can remember the first AA meeting I went to. Exactly. It was an old house up in northern Atlanta, but see, I was in an apartment with 3 other guys who were doctors and who had gotten over that fear. They took me by the hand. They said, don't think too much, you'll probably hurt yourself, and follow Mike around so you don't get lost going to the bathroom. Right? And they took me, and I walked into the room, and there was a bunch of old guys with white hair. I didn't have white hair those days. A bunch of old guys with white hair drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, and a lot of signs and stuff on the wall that literally the nicotine had stained the walls in this place. And you know what I felt? I can remember as a child in my mother's house on Thanksgiving Day, you would go in and there would be these wonderful smells, and you could see the turkey and you could see the cookies and the pie she'd made, and you'd go in and lay your head up against her side, up against her apron, and you would feel absolutely at home and absolutely comfortable. And that's the way I felt at my first meeting. And I went, wow, this doesn't make any sense.
So on that,
That's how it was.
That being said, when it just is described, if a physician enters an intensive, beyond just a 28-day program, their success is huge. What is happening in the intensive program that isn't happening, going to meetings? And should somebody, if they can, go to treatment prior to meetings? What's your view on that?
The more people that are looking out after my disease, the better off I am. The more I know about my disease, the better off I am. As a physician in rehab, you are faced with the absolute reality and inevitability of losing your medical license if you don't complete this program. If you complete it to their satisfaction, they send a little note to the medical board in your particular state, and they say he's good to go back. All right. What they do is there's a physicians recovery network that reaches out and grabs up the impaired physician and sort of protects them from the board. So they don't know who you are. They don't know that you've got a problem. They just know that the PRN has got you.
So it's positive to be able to have such a large consequence. Are you saying?
Oh yeah. And they it was intensive. You started out with a morning spiritual. I didn't like that. I thought I'd had enough sermonettes, and they said, shut up, sit down, and listen. And then we would be in meetings, group sessions, lectures from 9 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We would go to dinner someplace, and you had to go to some kind of meeting every day. So by the time you got home, it was 9:30. You didn't have time or energy to do anything. And when you got back to the apartment, you're talking recovery the whole time. You get up in the morning and you drink recovery and you eat recovery, and this goes on day after day after day. They send you out to the detox centers around town, and you lead meetings there with people who are just dragged out from under a bush someplace. And you do this for a long time.
You're changing more habits at once.
Yes. And you never learn something so well as when you teach it.
So I'm listening to this, and we're like, the choir, we get it and all that. I want to give you like the lay of the land where we're at. We're in BC. Vancouver's got huge overdose rates, the States as well. And there's a big push. There's a narrative, especially on Twitter. There's a huge narrative that recovery isn't this type of recovery. What you're talking about is not evidence-based, is not best practice, harms people. So not as a person in recovery, because the three of us have lived experience, so we have a passionate response. As a researcher who's done actual research, if somebody was to tell you, with their white coat, with their prescription pad for safe supply, say, well, 12-step recovery isn't evidence-based, what's your response?
The evidence that I'm aware of in the British Medical Journal just recently, the BMJ, they presented a study where they looked at physicians over the long term, and that's where the 70% rate comes from. I didn't make that up. There was recently a study, sort of a mega study of all the different reports about Alcoholics Anonymous, and the conclusion was that 20% of those people who went through the program of AA actually stayed sober. What I've heard, I've not looked at it as a 28-day program, it's only about 10%. All right. So
is that good, bad?
I'd rather be sober than not. I'd rather be happy in the morning when I get up. I would rather be have a significant degree of serenity in my life and in how I think and live. I'd be dead without it. There's no doubt about it. I was quit or die, and I was ready to die because I didn't know what to do. My take on using medicines. Well, clearly, if you have some mental illness, you must medicate it, right? And substituting one addiction for another. All the addicts I've known didn't really do them any good because they always come back to what the if you don't treat the underlying mental and spiritual aspects, it's not going to take in the long term. You can treat somebody with your favorite narcotic blocker, and they can take that forever, but they can never get off of it. Have they attacked the character defects and the feeling of low self-esteem and the other things that characterize addiction from the psychological point of view? No. And I mean, you can use that to get off of the narcotic and then taper it down once you're off. And that makes a lot of sense. It's the same rationale as a nicotine patch and nicotine gum. Now, I used to smoke, and I only met one person in my whole life that ever used the patch to quit smoking. So I don't know what the effectiveness long-term rate for Suboxone or those other guys are. I don't know. I believe, and you can't, it's like science has its place. All right, physicians, as a non-surgeon, a doctor is basically a pill pusher. You got a problem? Here's a pill. You got a problem? Take this. And there's an old name for people that come in the emergency room who take up all of your time, and they're old folks and they fall out of the bed, and they're called Gomers, which is get out of my emergency room. So I got 10 patients to see, they're behind you. I got 10 minutes to do this. Well, why don't you just take this and go on, all right? Go to a meeting. I don't know what a meeting is, but I can tell you to go there. It's like, I don't know how to do neurosurgery, but I can give you the phone number of the neurosurgeon. So, I know if it works for you, then that's all that counts. If it works for me, my pathway will not be like any other person's pathway. All right. I can share my experience and maybe you'll get something out of it, but you have to do it for yourself. You know, you got to walk that lonesome valley. You got to walk it by yourself. Remember that song?
No, but
I'm just, you know, I'm thinking how much better a treating physician, specifically for addiction, would be having gone through it. You know, having run the full course, and how much more insight, how much more beneficial for any individual. But nobody goes to the doctor and says, I want my addiction, like the underlying stuff, treated. It's, I have a problem with XYZ. I have a drinking problem. I'm addicted to opiates. And so that becomes the focus. And this is sort of my theory. It's influenced by other theories, but you know, even the 12 steps, I am a member myself, but I've always seen that, like, the biggest problem is all the different anonymous meetings. There's one for every specific thing, continually reminding us that narcotics is the problem, alcohol is the problem, crystal meth is the problem. And rather than just the underlying, how do we get beyond that? Like, if it was me, I'd just push them all together. It's Addiction Anonymous. Like, it doesn't matter. We're all looking for treatment of the underlying stuff and getting better, like you say, not just kicking the drug and expecting to feel great. You know,
the bottle was but a symptom, it says.
Exactly.
And if I don't treat the underlying problems, it's not going to get any better.
I guess my question is as a physician, like, what is the best approach for somebody who has an addiction, who has the mindset, if I just got off this pill or this drug, you know, what is their best approach? Is there a way out through a detox, through medication? You know, what's the first step for somebody, you know, now admitting that they have a problem? It's too broad a question.
No, it's not a stupid question. If you came to me and were standing in front of me and said, I think I have a problem.
Yeah.
My problem, my problem is drugs. My problem is alcohol. Well, no, my name is Lynn and my problem is Lynn. Okay. The drugs are but a symptom. I can put the plug in the jug, but it doesn't do anything about my underlying character defects, the low self-esteem that I suffer from, the ingrained character traits that I can't overcome, the absence of any sort of defense against that terrible compulsion that comes over me. It's not just the drugs, it's who I am as a person. And if you came to me, I would sit you down and I would say, where are you? Let's go to a meeting. Are you, what are you afraid of? What are the things in your life? You have to, I can't do this by myself. I simply can't. In the meeting rooms, you'll pick up a 1-year chip and everybody goes, how'd you do it? How'd you do it? And the answer is, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it by myself, right? And I don't expect I mean, you hear in the big book, they sent the big book to somebody in another city and they got sober by themselves. I couldn't have done that. You know, yeah. I have to have somebody else's help. Somebody that you see, for me, long time ago, somebody reached their hand out and pulled me out of this abyss that I was in and basically saved my life. And one of the reasons that I go to the meetings, and the main reason I wrote this book, was to pay back the debt that I owe all of those people who saved my life. So my job is to reach my hand out and help the next person up the line. That's just the way that this works. And because I can't do it by myself, I know what it's like to sit in that chair. I know what it's like to have this craving. I know what it's like to have no friends and no money. And hopefully I can get you to see that we're alike and that maybe you'll begin to trust me. And then once you start to trust me, then I can show you where hope is. And once you've got hope, then things become possible rather than impossible.
And the book's called Recovery from Addiction, A Physician's Journey of Discovery. And you can pick that up on your website. Where can people get the book?
Well, it's at all the usual places. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. If you just Google it, it'll show up in a bunch. You can get it in Japan and the Netherlands, believe it or not.
And so for somebody reading this book, is this to help them get started on their journey? Is this for somebody who's already on a journey and just like a little booster? Is it everything? Yeah.
Yes. It starts day one in detox, and you get my personal story to show you how I got there. But from there on out, basically, it's what is the first thing you need to know? What is the second thing you need to know? And the way that it's told is my different buddies that were there would have a story that expressed this principle. And one at a time, in a sequential manner, you go through all the principles that are necessary. You start out with honesty, you work your way through. It's not redoing the steps, it's taking the ideas and the principles and expressed as individual stories, things that happen to people that they shared. And occasionally there's some lectures from people that talk about different things. Some of the counselors will talk. There's meetings and you'll hear a story by some person that expresses some principle. And so you start out learning about the disease, and then you proceed through how do you start with the treatment and where do you want to end up and how do you get there. And at the end, this person that looks much like me is fixing to leave the next day, and he experiences serenity for the first time. He's sitting in the parking lot out there, and all of a sudden the trees had been a sort of 2D landscape, and they pop out into 3D. All right. And he goes, whoa. And all of a sudden the sun is shining in a completely different way. And he is actually in the moment and feeling serenity for the first time. That's what he's after. That's the goal. The goal is not abstinence. The goal is not sobriety. The goal is not recovery. The goal is, in fact, serenity.
Mm. Well said. Yeah, I think, I mean, for myself, low self-esteem, low worth, not like, you know, that universal question, who am I? I mean, I think that's really simplistic. And in every single room that I'm in, you know, I'm exchanging energies with people. And so it's really just like, what's my place in this room and with these people?
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever like a physician such as yourself, like that has that sort of, you know, stigma of being somebody that, you know, is the helper, that's too smart for addiction, you know, that would not ever get himself in trouble. It humanizes.
That didn't work, by the way.
Yeah. And so, you know, when physicians can get beyond their status and their ego and admit that they themselves also struggle in very humanistic ways, it allows the other guy that maybe, you know, never finished high school to have that trust and that hope that, you know, there's something different.
There's nothing different. The disease is the same. The underlying personality is the same. They told me more than once in rehab that if you lose about 10 IQ points, you do a whole lot better. And that's in fact true. Right? What you said about low self-esteem is essential. I think that is the central character trait that we have. That we as kids we always felt like we were on the outside. We'd never be good enough. We'd never make the mark. So what do? Well, you compensate. Well, if you think I'm smart, then you'll like me. And I became the arrogant asshole who knows everything, which fits into medicine really well if you think about it. The low self-esteem covers almost every part of our lives, and it's cured. It's treated by building up your self-esteem over the course of your recovery. They told me that self-esteem is built by doing steam and relax. I don't know if that's right or not. The other thing that's neat about physicians in recovery is that it takes them a month to realize that they aren't the doctors anymore. Now they're the patients. All right. So that whatever your recovery is, it's for a doctor, it's at least a month longer because you still think you're in charge.
Yeah, and I do know for sure that I mean I don't think anybody's born with low self-esteem. That it's something that's learned, and you know it can always be risen by our own personal responsibility and how we live our lives, what we say to ourselves, the spiritual component to this.
Low self-esteem becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
The thing that's most important about that, and the single largest enemy to overcome, I think, is fear. It's fear that drives all of my character defects. It's fear that drives my low self-esteem. The ego wants to run the world. I shut down my emotions a long time ago because they interfered. I couldn't stand the pain. As addicts and alcoholics, we are hypersensitive to the pain of others. We can't stand the pain of the world. We start out very, very honest because we're actually very honest people. But what happens is we see the hypocrisy and the lies in the world, and we can't stand that either. So the answer to that is to shut down the consciousness.
And that's why your book is so important, because as a recovery advocate as well, we hear so much government policies in the States and in Canada where to solve the overdose crisis, here's a pill. And we're all saying, but that's not going to do anything. Like, it's just like it's not going to give me self-esteem. It's not going to give me courage. It's like, it just isn't. And it helps you stay alive. Yes. Maybe. Well, for some people, that's what they say. So it, helps people stay alive. But I don't see the push from government policy and the people that are creating the healthcare response, putting any resources in everything you just talked about in the last couple of minutes. Yeah. It's like, and that's what we're trying to do with this show. We're not saying if you don't go to AA, you're going to die. Like, you go to AA, NA, church, like, I don't care where you go. But like, our response to these overdoses, and still people are dying from alcohol. We haven't even solved that. And that's pretty much safe supply. Like, if we're not going to work on that, we're absolutely doomed. So like, I just want to take a minute to appreciate and say thanks for your book, because we all need to tell our stories. Because when I first showed up to rehab, I had no idea that it was about getting your family back, getting your heart back, getting your friends or new friends. And like, I was just like, I don't need any of that. Like, I got a great life, like that's what I thought, Meanwhile, I obviously did it. So, I'm just, so if you're watching and listening, like, that's why we do this show. It's just to remind people, like, this is recovery, and recovery is about getting all that stuff back. Recovery is about sitting in a nice home with 2 dogs, one sleeping, one roaming around in the background.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. Content.
And people think, well, if I'm doing this, I'm going to have to give up fun. I'm going to have to give up going to parties and doing other kind of stuff. But the only thing I gave up was hangovers, tracks up and down my arms, running scared all the time. People say, I want to get my old life back. You could have my old life back. I'll give it to you. I want a new life. I want to go with something that works. Yeah. And the thing of it is that I can't tell anybody how to get sober. Right. I can only share what worked for me, knowing that it's not going to work for anybody else. Right. But maybe there's enough stuff in there that they'll get something out of it, and it'll help them along the path. But in the years that I've been observing, I was a pretty good clinical observer of human behavior, but I've learned more about human psychology since I've been in the program than in all my years. And I am happier now than I have ever been in my life, even as a child. Life is easier than it's ever been. I live in paradise. I live out on a little hobby farm in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. I live in paradise. life is just really, really good, and it keeps getting better. From day one, it started getting better, and it's never stopped getting better. Little ups and downs and this kind of stuff, but in general, it still hasn't stopped. And I'm still learning about better ways to live right now. You'd think that at 72 that you hit most things, but no, I learn new stuff every day. Now I'll read something and I'll go, oh, that explains the last 40 things I just read. Um, uh, it's it if you're not afraid of the past, if the future doesn't hang over you like the sword of Damocles, if you're content within yourself, life is really, really good. And you really verge on metaphysics, which I could talk about forever, about what fear actually comes from, about how to get rid of fear. And all those are getting way out beyond this. If you take what's in the big book and you want to go to the next step, that's what you'll find. All right. If you're a newcomer that doesn't know what you're doing, it starts at day one. If you're a guy who's been in recovery for a while and wants to learn a little bit more, it's there. If you're a practitioner, if you're a counselor or an addictionologist or a nurse dealing with it, you'll find ideas there that you'll probably never have seen. And there's some pretty amazing stories. There's a friend of mine who was a surgeon and woke up in a blackout in the operating room, standing over the open abdomen of a patient. He didn't know who the patient was. He didn't know what he was doing. And he ran from the OR and into the doctor's dressing room and just broke out in tears. And that night, his partner took him to his first AA meeting. But stuff
And
like
that story, unfortunately, is so common. And like I've heard of pilots doing the same thing. They don't know if they're landing or taking off. And the idea that addiction is just, for one population is just not true. We really appreciate you being on the show. We've run out of time. So Darren, you want to close this out? Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You can check out Dr. Linville Meadows' website at spiritualpathwaytorocovery.com. We'll have links to your Facebook and social media tags. The book, A Spiritual Pathway to Recovery from Addiction, A Physician's Journey of Discovery. Dr. Linville Meadows, thank you very much for coming on Talk Recovery with us today.
Thank you, guys. Good luck.
Everybody.
All right. Thanks for listening. This has been Talk Recovery on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. And to all of us and you out there in Facebook land, thanks for tuning in.
Later. Bye.
Bye.